Hi, whoever is on, we'll wait another minute or so, and then we'll get going. This is Leif Erickson with Momenta Partners. Okay, in the interest of time, let's get this going. We've got a lot to cover today. Again, this is Leif Erickson with Momenta Partners, and welcome to the 2020 version of Momenta Partners' annual prediction webinar. Today, we're going to share with you what we expect to happen in 2020 and beyond as a result of fundamentally transformative technologies such as edge, cloud, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. We want you to take away three things from today's webinar. First, digital transformation in the industrial and infrastructure sectors is in the early stages, but will be just as transformative as in other more visibly disruptive industries such as retail and media. No, we're not going to predict today that there'll be an Amazon for the industrial world, but as you'll see, there will be some substantial disruption. Two, the 20s will be a decade of great progress and change. The winners will be those companies that embrace a data-centric and agile approach to running their businesses. The losers will be those organizations which expend their energies and resources trying to resist change. Three, we're at the peak of the hype around digital transformation today as measured by the amount of money being thrown at it. But significant benefits have been slow to materialize. This is typical of technology inflection points and requires organizations to block out the noise and focus on what's real and important to their business. To help you better understand the implications of the predictions we will share with you today, we've assembled a distinguished group of industry practitioners. As the head of Momenta Insights practice, I will moderate the panel discussion today. For those who don't know me, I've spent over 30 years at the intersection of the industrial world and digital technology. This includes time at analyst firms AMR Research and Gartner, where I define markets such as enterprise manufacturing intelligence and asset performance management. Joining me on the panel today is Doug Harp, managing partner of Momenta's advisory practice. Doug brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to the discussion today, having held leadership positions at consulting firms and digital technology startups alike. Like all of our deep industry practitioners here at Momenta, Doug has a passion for helping industrial companies navigate the digital transformation journey. And last but not least, Dave Lafferty joins us on the panel today from his own firm, Scientific Technical Services. As the name suggests, Dave knows how to dig deep into the latest technologies transforming the industrial world, including edge, cloud, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. Dave has helped many companies, particularly in the energy industry, cut through the smoke and mirrors to make the right decisions about the digital technology in their own operations. Quick look at the agenda. So we're almost through the introductions and overview here, and the meat of it obviously is to talk about our predictions, and then we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. So let's just dive into the session, if you will. A little bit of housekeeping before we jump in. The first and most important item is that if you've got questions, please enter them in the panel. I believe it's at the bottom of the screen, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. The second thing is that the session will be recorded, and you will have access. We'll send you a notification and a link for that recording within a couple of days after the session. The other thing I'll point out is these predictions we're sharing with you today. This is the first time we're publicly sharing these predictions, but we will be writing and producing a research note which will come out later this month, which we will also share with you. So first, a word from our sponsor, if you will. Momenta Partners is a digital industry growth organization, firm, and we're focused on both the industrial and infrastructure organizations that use digital technology and are looking to transform their business, as well as the technology providers that provide solutions to those companies. So we really sit at the intersection of a number of different areas there. Well, let's dig into why you came here today. So let's start with a definition, and you can read it, but I want to make a couple of comments about what we call digital industry. Number one, you'll notice that it's about the business transformation of these industries as a result of technology, and not the other way around, right? And the other thing I would point out to you is that for us, it's all about these asset-centric sectors, right? They have unique challenges, unique opportunities, if you will, for digital transformation. And so everything you see today, all the predictions will be how the digital technology will impact these industries. You're going to learn more about what we mean by that in the session today. So let's dig into the first prediction. Prediction number one, industrial value chains will be dramatically reconfigured in the next decade, the decade of the 20s, as new outcome-based business models proliferate, such as product as a service, insights as a service, and power by the hour. So what we're really saying here is that how the industrial sector has been configured and run, and how organizations interact with each other, work with each other, is going to change dramatically. So let's dig a little bit more into that, and I'm going to start with Doug Harp. Doug, tell us why you think this is significant, and what's the biggest chasm to cross to get to this point?
Thank you, Leif. What we see is that we're going to see the coming of age of the industrial product as a service models and the prevalence of new business models enabled by these digital technologies that you mentioned. For many of us that have been in IoT for several years, this feels long overdue, but we really see three things that we predict happening in the 2020s. That these legacy machine builders will transform to digital service companies or risk being disrupted by new entrants who lead with digital. We'll see the maturity of digital-first full-stack companies. Think of machines plus digital grabbing market share. Today we see that in robots and fulfillment and discrete manufacturing. And as the physical, mechanical, electrical product commoditizes, these digital-first companies will move fast. That means that industrial brands that do not move now are going to give up 25 to 50% of market share to these digital companies. And we see industrial product providers at risk if they don't move.
Wow, that's a fairly big transformation for sure, and almost an Amazon-like transformation, if you will. How do you see the market ultimately playing out? Is this something we're going to see overnight? Is it going to play out very quickly in the next couple of years, or is it going to be a little bit slower to evolve?
I think we see it as fast in industrial time, but maybe slow in internet time. Industrial markets have an inherent infrastructure already built in, and brands that have been around for many years, so there is a time of change that may not be as fast as what we have seen in other internet disruptions. But so we believe that the industrial markets will remain fragmented and have a mix of new and existing models for the foreseeable future, and eventually aggregates as these models take hold. We see three categories of digital companies emerging. Digital enablers, those who use digital technologies to enable their current products. Digital expanders, those who add diversified digital assets to their product portfolios. And digital transformers, those who disrupt business models and make the big bets to really change the game. Those who do nothing or those who don't have a focused strategy will likely die. It's interesting to look at how full stack digital and product companies have been emerging. If you look at Tesla, for example, while they're not taking dominant market share in the automotive market, their valuation would certainly tell a different story, and everybody else is trying to play catch up. So we think we will see that, and we will see it from the digital companies that are emerging, and we will see it from legacy product companies that take a digital-first strategy.
Very interesting. Dave, what's your perspective on this topic? How do you see it playing out, not just from the perspective of the equipment manufacturers or machine builders, but also from the equipment buyers themselves that are part of this value chain?
Yeah, sure. I think there's still some issues that need to be resolved as we migrate to these new business models. For example, the power by the hour model. In the refining business, it's routine for us, if the margins are real high, we'll run the equipment at the ragged edge to try to keep availability up and sort of take advantage of those high margins, realizing that we shortened the asset life is sort of, and if I'm in fact renting compression rather than actually a compressor, will the person renting me this, providing the service, allow me to operate in that manner? So there are some questions like that will need to be resolved. But we're also seeing things like Emerson has their connected services where they install and run the sensors, they backhaul to their cloud, and then they do the analytics. And then what the end customer does is they actually buy the report rather than buying kit and assembling it and having their internal teams do it. And from an operational perspective, that model has been pretty well received. So I think we'll see more and more of this as these service providers provide more and more options.
Which begs the question of data. Who owns the data? There's obviously the equipment manufacturers have a certain amount of data. The owner operators have a certain amount of data, and ultimately, if we're going to see a dramatic reconfiguration of value chains, then there has to be a different approach to how data is managed and who owns it. Any thoughts from either of you on that, where, how we're going to resolve that issue, where the data is going to go, who's going to own it? Maybe ownership is not an issue. Maybe it's a shared data scenario.
How I've resolved it in the past is the owner-operator owns the data, but the service provider retains the right to reuse that data. So, for example, they might contract to provide raw readings as a data as a service, but they also retain the right to run analytics on that data and then sell the results. And in that way, you can sort of diffuse that whole conversation.
Yeah,
right.
Leif, along those lines, data governance is, like security, is going to become a huge issue, especially as we look at global companies who work across regional, country, and various different regulatory borders. And so we see that as a challenge for the industry, because some varying regulatory bodies are looking at this differently. So the movement of data in and out of countries or regulatory bodies is becoming a challenge to being able to do this globally.
It definitely represents a barrier. And as you know, Doug, when we talk to our own customers, the number one issue they bring up is cooperation from their customers, and I'm talking about from the sort of the machine builder OEM perspective. They're ready to deliver some of these new business models, but they keep saying the customers are not ready to move forward. Any thoughts on that? You know, how can they move their customers off the dime, so to speak?
I think that is there is the chicken and the egg challenge with digital products is until they are offered and the new business models are offered, it's hard for the buying side of the equation to take a step. So I think, you know, back to the digital first companies, that's all they are offering. But I think we're seeing a transformation in the value chain. Two areas that we see. One is the value-added reseller channel really being disrupted, and it's really questionable how much value they will actually be able to provide in the new digital model, or X as a service model. And then also system integrators, delivery channels like solution providers, ISVs, distribution channels, being able to provide this hybrid of OT and IT solutions and wrap that up into an outcome-based offering versus a project-based offering like they have, or a product-based offering like they have in the past. So
Right,
I think
right.
we think
point.
the supply side needs to move if they want the buy side to move fast also.
Right. No, excellent point. And I think that's a challenge. Nobody really knows what these new configurations will look like. Again, not unlike, you know, some of the other sectors that have been disrupted to date, right? Which is, you know, there's a little bit of wait and see there, and that's probably not the best position to take in terms of being ready for what comes next. And I guess that leads to another question, which is, you know, just how disruptive it will be. You mentioned the value-added resellers, distributors, et cetera, might get, you know, left out of the mix there. Any other thoughts on the nature of the disruption and winners and losers? Doug or Dave, either one of you, please jump in.
Yeah. So what I've seen is the adoption rate. The smaller the company, the higher the adoption rate. So the winners will be the people that can use these new business models to lower their, you know, delivery costs themselves, whether it's maintenance or you know, things like that. So they'll be the real winners. The losers, if you will be organizations that have already grown large internal teams. And that'll be very, so if you already have, so very similar to moving to cloud when, you know, and you have a large internal IT, you know, department running your data center, that's very disruptive. As we start moving this model to things like maintenance, you're also going to see that for established internal teams.
Right, good point. And just to add on to that, Dave, Doug, if you've got any, that's what happens when you both have names that begin with D. Doug, if you have anything to add to it, great, but just in general, how would you advise industrials to navigate this coming disruption?
Great question. First, they really need to understand what they want to be, what their vision is. It is paramount that they, you know, just like they have what their core product lines that they currently have, they understood what they wanted to be in the marketplace and then build their way there. It's also an iterative journey. There's no answer at this point of exactly what it should be. So they need to start adopting more agile and iterative approaches to pushing products and offerings to market, testing the market, and accelerating up on the things that are working and adjusting the things that aren't working.
Great. Well, great. Well, let's, in the interest of time, let's move on. We could talk about this prediction, you know, for a full hour if we wanted. And We will certainly be writing about it here at Momenta Partners in the coming weeks and months. But let's move on to our next big prediction. And that is that edge computing investments in the industrial and infrastructure sectors will grow by 50% in 2020 as adoption barriers dissipate. Dave, this is a huge prediction. It has many implications for industrial organizations. Why do you think 2020 will be a big year for edge investments?
So what we're seeing is the barriers to adoption have been significantly, reduced. Historically, we've seen three major reasons why adoption has been slow. The first is the cost and complexity of the initial, deployment. The second is the ongoing support costs. Once you get all these devices out into the field, how do you keep them evergreened? And then third is the cybersecurity risk. Many times that risk is greater than the benefits that the edge device. And what we see is lots of these barriers have been reduced in the last year.
Super. Yeah, no, that's all good points, and I think this is, if we think about 2019 was the year of the debate of edge versus cloud, some clarity is certainly be welcome in 2020. Doug, any thoughts on this? What's going to drive this growth in edge in the coming year? Doug, are you there? You may be on mute.
Sorry about that, Leif. So we see a very high growth rate in industrial use cases where safety, security, and reliability are critical, driven by the push for more on or near machine analytics, machine learning, and autonomous systems. So those use cases, which we have all been used to in the industrial world, are very close to the machine, edge computing becomes a critical aspect to expanding the business models. We've seen it in machine health. We see it significantly in things like vision and vibration, where there's just a lot of data at the edge. Some of it's sent to the cloud for analytics, but a lot of it needs to be kept at the edge. So we see a huge benefit in these scenarios closer to the edge, and we expect the market to start delivering what we call a seamless compute fabric cloud to edge to speed the adoption and cloud deployments of distributed analytic models. So we still believe that there's going to be distributed analytics from the far edge on machine all the way to the cloud and back. And we see many companies, including the cloud service providers, companies like Siemens via Pixium, and other companies like Nutanix starting to bring convergence technologies that will allow us to do that across the spectrum.
Great. Yeah, that's all good points. I want to switch back to you, Dave, and talk a little bit about standards. As you know, we've both had this experience over many years where standards are somewhat of a double-edged sword, right? Standards can hold up the growth of a market because people end up waiting for them and they never come, or in some cases they can stimulate the growth of a market. What are your thoughts as it relates to standards and in the edge arena, and what role do they play in the coming year?
Yeah, great question. It turns out we don't need any more standards. We have plenty already. And so things like Docker and containers and things like that have really contributed to the ability to deploy at scale, where I can have a central management and push these containers out to all 5,000 devices with the push of one button. So that's really, by using standard technology that's well proven, has really helping that. The other things like the adoption of Linux for the OS and things like that, where we start getting like a real OS on the edge is important. We're also seeing a lot of the protocols where we're seeing MQTT and standards like that really helping with the efficiency of the backhaul. So there's a lot of those kinds of standards that are proven in other areas and just being adopted by Edge. Another huge standard is the open automation group, where they'll be driving a lot of the critical control loops with Edge devices with their distributed, control nodes, and they're doing field testing of that technology in this year. So I think you'll see a lot of these standards helping us deploy at scale.
Great. That's good. Doug, any comments on that? And also, I guess, what I want to explore with both of you is, what's the counter argument? I mean, I think it's important to put that out there as well. I mean, this is again a very bold prediction. That will be a major investment in Edge in the coming year. What will hold it back, I guess, is another way of putting it. Any thoughts on that? Is that what might make this prediction not come to pass?
Security is probably one of the biggest things that will be anytime we're connecting things across the internet to the cloud, security becomes a significant issue. Back to data governance, how many challenges will there be once we try to start streaming massive amounts of data off the edge? And how does the underlying infrastructure become almost a commodity like we've seen in the cloud, and standards-based or API-based, so that it's easy for application developers or solution providers to deploy solutions. So, kind of the convergence of the connectivity layers and the compute layers accelerating up to a level where they're easy to buy and easy to utilize, like we've seen in the cloud. Right.
No, that's a great analogy there, and that brings me to another question for you, which is, is there any impact of a big increase in investments in the edge on the cloud? Will the cloud investments, specifically in the industrial world, keep pace with a major uptick in edge investments, and what's the relationship there, if any?
Well, I think the cloud investments will accelerate because right now the limitation of the cloud for industrial applications is the amount of data that's getting to the cloud. So as edge accelerates, the amount of data is going to proliferate, and that allows for significantly more advanced applications like machine learning and AI in the cloud. So we think that will continue to grow. In addition, industrials have started moving to the cloud, but many of their systems are still internal, so we think that they will pick up the pace of moving not just the active product to the cloud, but also
another big factor is, as you move away from specialized edge hardware, which has historically been where the industrial world's been at, and we go to more of a generic industrial computer that the function is defined by software, not by hardware, then what you're going to see is that initial investment can change as the asset changes. So in the oil and gas world, things like artificial lift, where you might start off with a submersible pump, and then change over to a rod lift. With a software-defined controller, you just simply put in new software and it can change the role. And I think that will really help with the adoption and the total cost of ownership of these investments.
Right. No, that's great. And I guess if I can summarize our prediction here is that, a combination of standards, cost reductions, significant cost reductions, better recognition of where, the role of edge versus the role of cloud in the industrial world, I think one thing that's implicit in all of this is the proliferation of wireless sensors. All of these things are going to contribute and come together to make 2020 the year of edge, if you will, in the industrial world. So let's move on then to our next prediction. Equally as bold, if you will. And what we're saying is that starting in 2020, several well-funded industrial-focused artificial intelligence and machine learning vendors will fail as the focus shifts from generic approaches to outcome-based approaches. And this shouldn't, in some ways, it shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody that's followed the technology arena for any number of years. And certainly I have and we have at Momenta. And so what we're saying here is, as you've seen on the press, there have been major investments by both traditional industrial firms like GE and Siemens and ABB, et cetera, as well as some very well-funded startups such as C3AI and Uptake. And we're saying that, these major investments are going to, because in many cases they weren't able to show any return, are going to result in the failure of some significant companies. And we're not predicting any specific ones, but just that those are examples of companies in the space. So, Dave, let's dig into this a little bit. I mean, given the amount of money that has been invested in industrially-focused, AI and machine learning vendors, what does that mean for the industrials themselves looking to invest in this area? What does it mean for the decisions they make in the coming year on what they invest in and not?
Yeah, great question. I think it's important to sort of segment this market, though, since it's so huge. And there's really four major sort of segments that the industrials can pick from. The first one is where they basically develop their own internal teams. You see this a lot of times in large major oil companies like BP, Shell, Chevron, and the market there are things like data robot that helps these internal teams be more efficient. The second market is the actual analytic firms that they've assembled lots of very smart data scientists, and you send them your data and they send you a model back. Spark, Cognitive is a good example of one of those kinds of firms. The third is sort of a new and sort of disruptive technology. It's a self-service analytics. It sort of started with business intelligence, but now we're seeing where end users, without the use of programmers or data scientists, can actually build, predictive models. So that very similar to like before there were spreadsheets, end users had to hire a programmer to read in the data and make the tables and the analysis. And then if you wanted a different analysis, you had to get the programmer to rewrite it. That this self-service sort of becomes almost like the same as what spreadsheets did. So, and then the last one is where the market is not really anything about machine learning and AI per se, but they just simply add that to enhance their product. And you're seeing that like in the video, surveillance world where, computer vision is being used. The reason that we think we're going to see some failures is the internal teams have had a lot of problem with delivery because they tend to work isolated. This team they've assembled don't have the domain knowledge, and so delivery's been a real issue, and there's been a lot of disenchantment there. And we're also seeing the analytic firms also sort of lack the domain knowledge, but as they gain it, one of the concerns that the industrial side has is that now you're making them smart in your domain, of which then they can sell to your competitors. When I was at BP, I helped Smart Signal get started. And unfortunately, after we taught them the oil and gas business, they were able to go to our competitors and sell that insight. So So that's why there's sort of a disenchantment. So there's a lot of interest in these self-service models where you can build predictive models or even use machine learning to build other machine learning on the edge.
Yeah.
So very disruptive.
Yeah, no, those are interesting points, and very interesting point around the domain knowledge, which is, quite frankly, the nut of the prediction, right? Which is that if you're not building that domain knowledge in, then it's less valuable to the end user. Doug, what's your perspective on this? Does this mean less investments in artificial intelligence and machine learning overall, or simply a refocusing?
Yeah, I think we see it as maybe a refocusing, certainly not less investments. That is at the end of the day, getting AI or machine learning to start hitting or outpacing the capabilities of a human is obviously the objective in many of these use cases. And we think that there will become an ML or AI fabric that everybody builds on, and as Dave said, this will significantly enhance the ability of domain-focused solutions and use of these self-service tools and technologies.
Which leads to another question, which is, what applications are going to drive this market? And I guess a corollary to that is what role do sort of the platform vendors play, right? Are they a factor in this thing? Is there a disintermediation thing happening here where you're going to have the platform vendors and then application providers that provide, specific applications, domain-specific applications, if you will? Dave, any comment on that?
Yeah, sure. As the platform wars raged on, they competed by adding additional features. They've pretty well added about every feature that we can think of, so there isn't much left. So how they differentiate themselves is exactly that. They actually have solutions that are implemented that are very domain, specific, using their, specific platform tools. And that's how they see themselves being able to, retain the kind of growth that they've seen in the last few years.
Right. So, Doug,
maybe along
ahead.
those lines.
Yeah, please.
We see, I think, three things. One is the AI ML will be made accessible and usable by the domain engineers. Companies like DataRobot are really gaining traction in that area. That open standards, open source, open APIs are going to replace the siloed closed systems that emerged first and early in the market. And that AI ML will follow a pattern very similar to other technology changes with aggregation by big players of what we call this fabric, and then alongside that, well-funded outcome-based solution providers who are really solving problems and getting traction around specific industrial use cases, and eventually that will converge.
So rolling back to the beginning, Doug, I asked Dave about what does it mean for industrials looking to invest in AI, ML. What's your position on this or view of that? What should they be doing? How should they be approaching this market?
I think they're going to take a couple approaches. One is look at the outcome-based solutions that are available where they can solve problems and get return now, and how those might embed on their products so that they can provide reliability and other types of services out to their customers. And then start maturing on the use of these AI ML platforms that allow them to do a lot more discovery, and there is a data science aspect to this, so they can bring their domain knowledge, because typically the value for industrials is they have IP and knowledge of their products that they don't share. And so if they can embed that into their models, they have and they can utilize underlying technologies and not try to develop those, then we see them being able to move out ahead of others.
Right. It ties back, if you will, to our first prediction about the reconfiguration, right? How companies invest in this stuff, what kind of capabilities they deploy. So great. Well, that's a great discussion and overview. And again, this will continue to be a space to watch. So let's move on now to our fourth and last prediction. And true to form, the last one is not the least disruptive by any means. And this is what we're saying is that in the next 5 years, at least 1/3 of industrial companies will shift 20% of IT budgets to OT. And for those on the phone that aren't familiar with the term OT, that term refers to operational technology, or the technology used to manage and operate the physical plant or physical infrastructure or maintain that infrastructure. So traditionally very independent of the IT world, which has been focused primarily on the enterprise apps, so the financial or back office apps. So what we see is as a major shift, and we've seen several large companies announce something on this order of budgets from IT to OT in order to fund their digital transformation initiatives. So this is, Doug, this is a prediction, of course, that will not go down well in some corners and will certainly elicit some skepticism. Is it even possible to shift that much of an IT budget to the OT side of the house?
Yeah, absolutely. The cloud has really changed everything in IT. Half of enterprise IT has been commoditized and can be outsourced. Better, cheaper, faster with the cloud, and we've seen large-scale adoption for the compute, storage, data collection, processing, visualization. These really have become table stakes and things that industrial companies can easily outsource. And we see many of our customers optimizing the spend and really looking at the basic IT functionality as operational capabilities that they can buy.
Right, as a service, you mean?
As a service, yeah.
Yeah, right. But so why do it in the first place? So I mean, what are companies, what are industrial companies are going to do with this money? What's the value?
Well, first the why, then maybe I'll talk about the where. So one, it frees up money for core business and product digital initiatives that can be monetized, which is really the mandate we see, turning digital into dollars. And in IT, it's a cost center. In digital, it is a monetization strategy. Where do we see it going? We see more of it going to OT, but it's really a combination of OT and IT around the digital product and the digital operation of these companies. In the early days of IoT, many companies had cloud-centric plays launched with IT. We're highly dependent on IT. With recent advances in edge communications and sensor technology, we just see more of that spin moving from kind of IT-centric, cloud-centric to the near real-time actual insights at or near the machine. And one thing we really need to keep in mind is that mission-critical industrial use cases require faster and more deterministic insights and actions at the asset in the process to really realize the big business benefits. Automation systems, many of these systems are at the factory floor and in the product. So if I'm doing asset tracking, I'm doing logistics, I'm automating machines, I have to do that at or near the machine, and that is really the domain of OT technologies and OT competencies. But when we say moving dollars from IT to OT, we really mean moving dollars from IT infrastructure to digital product and digital operations.
Right. It's somewhat of a semantic issue because in some organizations, some of this stuff is underneath IT. So we certainly want to be clear about that. It's really about moving money from sort of more established legacy applications. So great. Dave, that is, your thoughts on this? Do you concur with this shift and
Oh, yeah,
the
definitely.
inevitability of it?
Yeah, without question. If you look at organizations like BP that have adopted the DevOps model, they've really moved the operation side over to cloud, and then the development side has actually been moved over to the actual business units, to the OT side. And with things like with the DevOps type tools, that you can really have very lean, rapid, development of new features and new products, and that's all being driven by the business. So besides just saving money, you're also seeing the ability to adapt and to get new features into your core set of tools very quickly with this new model. So it's more than just shifting from one side to the other. It's changing the fundamental way that we deliver, digital tools.
Right. Well, that's a good point. And you see this playing out in the oil and gas sector, and particularly with the majors like BP. This is who spend a substantial amount of money, as we know, on IT.
Yeah, they recently closed their internal data centers. So the one in Europe shut down in December, and the one in North America is scheduled to shut down this month. So yeah, they've already made that shift. The smaller oil and gas operators are already there. One of my clients, who's a mid-tier, drilling company, they have one person left in IT. Everything else is software as a service or that kind of model. So they have very little internal IT people left. So the smaller operators have already made that change.
Right. That and that certainly makes some sense. A little bit easier for them because they probably were didn't have as much infrastructure in place in the first place. Is that correct to assume?
Yeah, and there was less sort of kingdoms that had to be torn down, right?
Right. Yes, of course. That's always a challenge when that's there. So, Doug, your thoughts on that and how it might play out in some other industrial sectors? Again, to Dave's point, certain organizations, where there's more established infrastructure and a bigger organization may take longer. Do you see the same thing happening in other industrial sectors?
Yeah, I think we see it across all sectors. I think outsourcing or moving to the cloud with IT infrastructure hasn't really shown to be sector specific or even size specific. So many mid-market companies are also moving quickly, and so we expect all enterprises to leverage this opportunity to move non-core spend outside the company and focus their internal energies on building intellectual property that enhances their products.
Yeah, that makes sense. And given our other predictions around edge and the sort of the disruption of the industrial value chain, AI, machine learning, all areas that need to be invested in, they've got to find the budget from somewhere. And most of these organizations, of course, run fairly lean already. So, any other thoughts on this in this prediction before we move on? Okay, great. Well, let's then move into the Q&A section. And for the audience, just a reminder, there is a panel I think it's on the bottom, somewhere on your screen in any case, where you can enter questions. And I put the predictions, all of them up on this screen so you can see them and ask questions about any of them. But we have a great question that actually ties to our last prediction that came in here, which is that, and I'll just read it here. It says, on the shift of IT to OT budgets, agreed. But who is going to become the lead, IT or OT? We've been talking about convergence for a while. Do you see it happening? And again, who will win? In an ideally digital transform enterprise, both merge, or won't they, and why? Dave, do you want to pick that up first, and then I'll ask Doug to answer that.
Yeah, sure. I guess I don't see winners and losers. I just see the roles have significantly changed, and the IT will be accountable for the delivery, for the day-to-day operations, but the actual development of the digital tools will shift over to OT, and so I think that'll be sort of the big step change is the adoption of DevOps, and the lean approach will significantly change how we design and develop digital tools.
Let me challenge you a little bit on this before we move over to Doug, which is to say that aren't the skills and knowledge a little bit different in the IT world than the OT world? And I know there's convergence there, right? The sort of core underlying technologies is becoming more and more similar, but how those technologies are used and the implications of using them improperly are different in those worlds, correct?
Yeah, I think the big issue is how do I match my business needs with the tools being developed? And that has always been a real struggle. And with this new model, you sort of the OT people sort of take control of that, and they really focus on the features that are important to the business. And it becomes a much more of a business-oriented discussion. And with the automated tools, there's less and less need for deep IT skills in that arena. So and that's why the sort of the delivery and the operations become where those IT skill sets become important.
Got you. So that's interesting. So OT definitely has a bigger role, if you will, going forward, a bigger budget as we've talked about. Doug, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with Dave. It's not about winners and losers, but I really think it starts with the digital organization, which is product, go-to-market, and technology. And so, until you have decided what your product offerings are going to be, how you're going to take them to market, and what you need to build, I think the technology aspect is really going to be driven off of that. So for companies that want to have a connected, smart, autonomous product, they will be looking at product development teams who have the capabilities to develop those technologies, software, whether they partner for it, whether they buy it, or whether they build it. And so we really view it along those three tracks and really drive it from the product offering and what the company wants to be versus a quote-unquote battle between OT and IT, which has been kind of a historic challenge because those two technologies have typically been segmented from each other or integrated through kind of a lightweight integration in the past. So,
right.
So we really prefer to view it from start with the product and start with the digital organization, and you're going to move to things like lean and agile and really different ways of thinking and doing things across the organization, not just within the technology aspects.
Right. No, that's a great point. It goes back, I think, to the point I made at the beginning of the webinar that organizations to be successful going forward have to be data-centric and agile, and that cuts across the organization. So, and I think both of you made the point that it's counterproductive to turn this into a battle as opposed to more restructure the organization around collaboration in these areas, because they each bring different skills and knowledge bases that are important to making it happen. So good. Here's another interesting question. Do you see, going back to the first prediction around the reconfiguration of value chains, do you see certain industrial value chains that are likely to get more reconfigured earlier than others? Doug, why don't you start off with that? Is there some segments of the industrial world that are closer today that that have already made more investments? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think we see a lot of movement in logistics and supply chain. So both in places like fulfillment centers, where you're seeing digital robots going in and replacing people, and things like asset tracking and telematics have moved quickly out into the market. So I think we see that much, but we also see many of our manufacturing customers, so discrete manufacturing further ahead, process manufacturing starting to move quicker. Process manufacturing moved quickly to do kind of operations of IoT and put in a lot of sensors in big plants, but now the product providers are starting to look at digital and see how they fit into that with their products.
Great. No, that's good. Now, so Dave, your thoughts on this? I know your experience is primarily in the energy sector. Is the energy sector specifically going to move fast? Or are they going to, as they have in some digital areas, been a bit of a laggard?
Yeah, sure. Especially with the unconventionals, the people that don't digitize just aren't, competitive, and the people that are currently doing well right now are the ones that the only time they go out to a well site is when there's a problem. They just don't blindly do routes and things like that. Also, the equipment manufacturers are telling me that if they're not digital in 5 years, they probably won't be long for this world. So it won't be a revolutionary thing, but it'll be almost just an expectation that, of course, you can, I'll be able to log in and see what that pump is doing, and it'll become almost a core, requirement to do business. So
right.
Yes,
so who's going to log in? So does that, does reconfiguration mean that the equipment manufacturers are going to be monitoring that on behalf of the owners of the assets, as opposed to
I
the
think you'll see a whole spectrum of stuff. The equipment manufacturers will want to log in to finally understand how their equipment is used, because historically they've dropped shipped it and that's the last they've seen of it. So now they can use that data to build better product. They also see it as a new, revenue stream where maybe they would do the maintenance and do the predictive maintenance work too. But then the customers themselves will expect that they can feed that data into their own systems too. So I think you'll just see a wide, number of customers in it, but the expectation will be that these devices, will be smart.
Right. Another question came in about the shift from IT to OT and who owns all the data. I hear, over and over how data is a mess within an organization, yet it's critical to drive investments. How do the organization clean their data? Maybe in just one sentence, guys, because we only have a couple minutes. Response to that, Doug, on sort of data ownership and cleaning up data to make it more useful?
I would say a big challenge is the question that came in. Technically, this is a very technical aspect and somewhat a unique aspect for many customers, but so I probably will leave it to the technology experts to opine on that, but it is, we clearly see the challenges, but many there are technologies that help us clean up data and help us contextualize data and be able to use unstructured data sets. So, those technologies are moving, but I would probably leave it for a different podcast, maybe on a more detailed technical topic like this.
Good point, because that's something we could dig deep into. Dave, one last word on that?
Yeah, so the two big things that will be our challenge this year will be, segmentation, being able to make sure we can properly segment our data to the proper owners, And number two, the ability to put all this data back into context, so to glue it all back together such that you have a coherent view. Those will be the two big things for this year.
Great, thank you. All right, well, we have come up on the hour. Let me leave everybody with this. Thank you, first of all, for joining us today. Thank you to Doug and Dave for generously giving their time to this. And you can see up here there's a snapshot of our website. Please do visit it, and you'll see a lot more information on these subjects. And as I mentioned, we will be putting out a research note on these predictions later this month, so stay tuned, and we'll be happy to share that with you. Again, thank you for joining, and we look forward to potentially interacting with you in the future.